Hello, happy Monday. Welcome to another round of Learn with Lo. I'm excited to continue our conversations of the last couple weeks where we really got to dive into this kind of health technology sphere. I get so many questions about all of the different wearables that are out there, whether it's the Oura Rings or the Whoop and HRV tracking, all the way to a lot of our different devices that help us with things like continuous glucose monitoring, and kind of that family of CGMs and glucometers as well too. So I know that there's lots of different questions, lots of different curiosities, because it's so cool how many different avenues we have around just more proactive measurement and tracking of our health. And I think it gives us some great objective data as well. Sometimes we can get so much into kind of like our own thoughts and like own feelings and kind of get inside of our head, so to speak, that it really helps us be able to more in tune, focus on our body as well. Or on the other side of the equation, I think a lot of these wearables, whether it's tracking things like HRV, heart rate, sleep, continuous glucose monitors, I think they also sometimes kind of lull us into a little bit of a false sense of reality. Like we might forget like what it even feels like to feel good. So we get to those points too, where I think some of these wearables help us really give an objective look at how does our body feel. We may not feel stressed per se in terms of perceived stress, but our brain and our body are definitely feeling stress of some kind. And then it's our job to proactively identify and manage where that might be coming from. So I think regardless, a lot of this like kind of wearable device world helps us really get in tune with that mind, body, brain, body connection if we allow these devices to work as they're intended to, and just give ourselves that good objective look at our health from the inside out. So last week we really talked about this concept of continuous glucose monitors. If you're not familiar with them, they're that wearable device that you punch into the back of your arm. You can wear them for 2 weeks. They connect to a mobile app and they'll literally tell you real-time measurement of your overall glycemic response throughout the day. So they've gotten more and more popularized with companies like NutriSense and Levels that are getting some of these CGM monitors available to the public, which I think is awesome, as long as we know how to use them, because there are actually a lot of misinformation out there around what should blood sugar balance look like. Remember that parasympathetic, like rest and digest state? Our body should be able to use fats for fuel. Then, though, our body should have a healthy ability to switch over to utilize carbohydrates for fuel. They burn a lot faster, they burn a lot stronger, but once they're gone, they're gone. And those are really meant for more like high stress, acute type situations. And then when that stressor is gone, we should be able to shut that response off and go back to that parasympathetic rest and digest fat burning state, right? So it's this concept of metabolic flexibility is being able to switch and shuttle fuel sources based off of the energetic need or kind of the stress load at that particular time. Let's be real, that sounds awesome when things are perfect on paper, but the standard American lifestyle, the standard American diet, it does not really support that all of the time, because we are so far removed from really just nature and how our body was cyclically designed to match a lot of components of nature, whether that's the light and dark cycle of the sun with our circadian rhythm, or even the cycle of the moon with women and their natural menstrual cycles. We live inside 93% of the time, so we're exposed to more like artificial light and screens and all of this stuff, not to mention kind of our ultra processed food and just having an abundance of food available to us at any waking call, and not to mention how diet culture starts to get us demonizing and thinking about food completely the wrong way, right? So we don't really have a natural society system right now that has a really solid understanding of this concept of metabolic flexibility or blood sugar balance, and that's why we have so many issues, right? 1 in 3 Americans have prediabetes. 1 in 3. 80% of people with prediabetes have no idea that they have it. So that is right there, such a proactive and preventative opportunity for us to be able to identify whether do we fall in that cohort. Even if we feel like we eat a healthy diet, I think early detection is key. So we'll talk about that a lot today, because you would, maybe knowing that statistic now, not be surprised, but you would be surprised how many individuals show up in my clinic in front of me, and I'm starting to talk to them on their labs about blood sugar balance, and they're like, my doctor has always said my blood sugar was great, my blood sugar was normal. I'm like, yeah, that's the problem, is because we have a medical society that's primed to treat an issue once it's already present, versus watching someone make that nice, slow, steady decline towards a diabetic state, and we don't do anything about it until it's something that's like actively treatable. I'm like, no, I'm talking about your blood sugar balance, because if you continue down this trajectory, you will be part of that statistic in 5 to 10 years. I'm telling you right now, you're headed that direction based off of some of these more proactive labs that we're able to draw, and a better discussion around it, right? So early detection is key. So I think it's really important that we understand working with health practitioners that are more forward thinking, and they understand, how does this concept of metabolic health fit together, right? So we understand that things like poor sleep and deep sleep on a fitness tracker are going to be early signs of insulin resistance. So it's like, of course, I'm looking at people's like, hey, you have a wearable. I see you have a watch. I see you have this. Can I take a peek? I'm always looking at other markers besides just how they feel, because sometimes that's not always the best indicator. Or looking at things like that low HRV score, which we've been talking about, can be indicative of things like adrenal stress, or what we'll talk about today, these mitochondrial dysfunction at the cellular level. Like, I'm identifying and seeing things that like, yeah, your body's not too stoked about energy production right now. And they're like, yeah, I'm always fatigued. I'm like, yep, that makes sense. Like, I would see that, right? We can detect those types of things when we look at the bigger picture and the body as a whole. Not to mention even doing some more proactive and preventative labs, like using fasting insulin levels to be able to really look at blood sugar dysregulation issues that are happening years before someone's fasting glucose or even their A1C score shows any signs of problems. So that's kind of our first piece there, is just being like early detection being key, and also understanding why this blood sugar issue and just this concept of building towards this insulin resistance picture is so rampant. And that's what really brings us to a conversation of today, which is where we want to talk about the current understanding of blood sugar regulation through things like conventional medicine or diet culture, is that we have this preconceived notion that blood sugar imbalances or diabetes is this overt overconsumption problem. That is exactly what we associate, right? It's like, oh, when someone has diabetes, they must be eating their way out of house and home. Like, even a lot of conventional doctors, or even, like I said, conventional, more trained registered dietitians, they get somebody in there and they're like, oh yeah, if you have blood sugar issues, your insulin is high, or your fasting glucose is high, or your A1C is high, you just eat too much. You eat too many calories. Or, in our more recent understanding, you eat too many carbohydrates. Yet, even in our keto craze, and how long has this concept of calories in, calories out, eat less, move more, how long has that been around? How many people have downloaded, I mean, in the millions, probably billions, downloaded a food tracking app like a MyFitnessPal? And it's like, yet we continue to struggle with obesity even worse than ever. Yet we continue to see these statistics, like 1 in 3 people having prediabetes, and that number continues to climb. And now we're even making pretty aggressive recommendations for weight management strategies in our youth population. I'm like, anyone sense a trend that this is a problem that we probably haven't quite understood, and we have way oversimplified this blood sugar dysregulation conversation? And everybody is out there thinking that healthy nutrition is a game of calories and carbs. I'm here to tell you that that is not true. I am not going to go as far as saying, so do not quote me. Don't say, oh, Lauryn says that calories and carbs don't matter. No, I am not saying that calories and carbs don't matter. I am just saying that is a hugely reductionist and oversimplified rationale around a very deeper systemic and metabolic health issue. We cannot be addressing these wide metabolic health issues with conversations around eat less, move more, or go keto. We have to be done with this because it's way oversimplified and it's not doing the American population, obviously, very much justice, because we're still having people every day being diagnosed with these conditions and they're not necessarily eating their way out of house and home. And a lot of people that come in with elevated fasting blood sugars and I start talking to them about blood sugar issues, they're like, yeah, but I'm keto. I'm like, well, obviously that's not working for you. So it can't just be this simple conversation of calories and carbohydrates. So what is it, right? We have to recognize that this is a bigger issue around energy management, right? So we're going to rewind back. I'll give you guys a little bit of like what I want to say, like anatomy and physiology 101 here, but I'm going to try to keep it super simple. So when we go back to this conversation around metabolic flexibility, right? The understanding that our body has two different fuel sources. I sometimes want to burn carbohydrates. I sometimes want to burn fats. I should be able to flip-flop between those two based off of when I need it, right? It's kind of like somebody where, hey, we should have a good enough adrenal resilience and capacity, enough metabolic flexibility that if push comes to shove and like you eat breakfast and you don't have an opportunity to get to lunch for 6 hours later, right? As long as that's not a habitual thing for you, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like 6 to 7 hours before I got to lunch today. You don't pass out. Right? It's like, that's metabolic resilience. Like we should be able to say, oh, okay, I've definitely digested my breakfast by now. 6 hours later, I'm looking for lunch, but it's not that I lose all cognitive function because my blood sugar plummets. I have no metabolic flexibility to be able to switch over to fat for fuel. And that's what I see with some individuals that do get themselves into an insulin resistance picture or blood sugar imbalances picture, is that they can't keep blood sugar stable. Their blood sugars crash, whether they know it or not. A lot of times this presents as things like anxiety, joint pain, trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, that type of stuff, right? So we have to understand that this concept of metabolic flexibility holds true on the other end of the spectrum too. So we have this keto craze out there, right? That's all about carbohydrates. Well, you reduce carbohydrates for so long, you really have not a great ability to reintroduce them back in. Then the second your body does see a carbohydrate, you're like, whoa, my blood sugars were all over the place. I'm like, yeah, because your body has no ability to know how to burn carbohydrates for fuel. So then when it does get put in those situations, it's a stress. It's kind of like a high intensity athlete trying to do keto. I'm like, no, you need carbs. And so by doing that, you're actually putting an additional stress on the body trying to eat low carb and over exercise. Like, not going to work, right? So I want you guys to understand that this metabolic flexibility issue, that is the secret sauce. We want to be able to burn carbs when we need it. We want to be able to switch to fats when we don't. And if we don't have this ability to flip-flop between the two, we end up with an energy management issue. This goes back to the little cellular battery packs in our cells called mitochondria. So don't totally glaze over when I talk about mitochondria, because I think that if you haven't heard of them yet, this is going to explode in terms of more awareness around mitochondria, because mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells that build energy, right? So when we think about blood sugar regulation issues, insulin resistance issues, I just visualize someone that has an energy management problem. Their body does not know how to use energy from their food or gain energy from their food, because we have some cellular gridlock issues happening, right? So we don't manage energy and mitochondrial dysfunction through less calories or less carbs, right? That's a very band-aid, short-sighted solution to it when we start to understand where does insulin resistance and blood sugar dysregulation come from in the first place, right? So the first place that we have to look is this metabolic flexibility issue, especially this combination between what I call like high fat and high carb foods. Perfect example of what we would call like an energy gridlock at the cell. It's like, whoa, my body just saw like pizza, right? It's like, okay, wow, high carb, high fat food. And your body's like, I don't even know what to burn first. There's just so much coming in at once. I don't know how to handle it all, right? So our body doesn't do very well with the ultra processed foods of the standard American diet, taking things like a potato and frying it. It's like that's a high carb, high fat food, which is why individuals that have a lifestyle that utilize quite a bit of those high carb, high fat foods do tend to have a problem, right? So that's kind of the typical understanding of insulin resistance or diabetes. Everybody thinks that that is the one and only picture in which you get blood sugar issues or pre-diabetes. It's like, no, I guarantee it is not just eating more of those like high fat, high carb foods at the same time. It's also lacking metabolic flexibility because maybe you have a very skewed or disordered relationship with carbohydrates because you eat keto, right? You eat low carb, you kind of pride yourself and like, I don't eat carbohydrates, I eat very low carbohydrates, right? We demonize to the point now where it's like, oh, fruit is too much sugar. Don't eat rice. Oh my gosh, you eat potatoes? I can't even believe it. I can't eat beans because lectins, right? It's like all of these crazy things that we do to demonize like nature's good, high fiber, complex carbs, right? So we're sitting here demonizing that and eating like bacon wrapped cheese covered avocados, right? High fat foods. But then we demonize things like fruits and oats and potatoes. But that same person then, when they do eat carbs, they have no problem mowing through chips and crackers and keto cookies and alcohol. And so it's just so funny to me because we have, I think, a really disordered view of carbohydrates in this keto world. I see lots of individuals that have blood sugar regulation issues because they follow a low carb diet when they're trying to be good, but then they have such a disordered relationship that they won't ever include like good complex carbs. And if they are going to eat carbs, they're going to go ham. And they're going wild. They're like, we're doing donuts, we're doing the thing, we're doing the fries, we're doing the, and I'm like, where's the middle? I'm like, those are individuals that also deal with blood sugar imbalance issues. They're on the road to insulin resistance, but they don't know it because they think about, well, yeah, but what about all that time that I eat low carb and I eat so good? I'm like, yeah, but there's no middle ground to when you include the good high fiber carbohydrates to teach your body how to use those. You either eat the shit ones that are high fat, high carb, or you're only high fat, low carb. Like you never teach your body how to use this metabolic flexibility like it's designed to do. I'm like, what if we just had a better relationship with carbohydrates and it wasn't always such an all or nothing mentality? So I would say our first misunderstanding of this insulin resistance issue and why we have so much blood sugar dysregulation is because we don't understand metabolic flexibility. 100%. We have just a calories or kind of a keto approach around it. Second thing I think that we get into is this energy availability conversation. We can't have energy if energy's not coming in. This is the individuals that get stuck really in the low macros, low calorie intake, or they get stuck on more of the calorie controlled diet strategies where they're eating not even enough food for their toddler on a regular basis. I had one of my gals the other day, she's like, yeah, I saw a TikTok that like really got me thinking. She's like, if you were to put all of the food that you consumed on a kitchen table in a day, like this is what I ate today, if that isn't enough to sustain your toddler if you would look at that and be like, oh yeah, I would feed my toddler more than that, then you are not eating enough. I was like, I love that analogy. That's good, because it's very true for a lot of people that get into that like low calorie is healthy mentality. Lowest calorie means lowest energy. That's all it is. Calorie is a unit of energy. So if we're eating a low calorie food, then we're saying that low energy is better, and we're surprised that our energy sucks when we're thinking about calories. It's like, well, yeah, your energy sucks because you're thinking that like lowest calorie is best, but that really just means lowest energy. So how do you expect your body to produce energy from not enough food to sustain a toddler? Which also kind of gets into another reason why we have insulin resistance picture, is because we have such low nutrient density. So not just an energy availability problem, but if you're only eating 800, 1,000 calories a day and not really paying attention to what you're putting in your body, how are we getting enough vitamins and minerals and cofactors and antioxidants and all of these like vital things that our body needs? And do not tell me supplements, because that not the same at all. But like your potassium and your sodium and your magnesium, your vitamin C, all of your polyphenols and your flavonoid, like all of these powerful things that are antioxidants for our mitochondria and important cofactors that actually make energy production happen. How do you expect that to happen with a low calorie or a low nutrient dense diet? And last but not least, I think that the one piece that's forgotten in this whole insulin resistance picture, which I see a lot of time in my clinic too, is a congested liver. We have to remember that our liver is a very important metabolic organ. It's responsible for about 500 different metabolic processes, one of which being to keep our blood sugar stable between meals and also help us switch that metabolic flexibility. So that's the site of that metabolic flexibility switch, is like, okay, I've burned through carbohydrates. Now I need you to switch to fats for fuel. If our liver is congested or sluggish liver because we're overloaded with toxin exposure, endocrine disrupting chemicals, again, we're amino acid deficient or vitamin mineral deficient, if we're not taking a poop every day, like our liver is congested because it has all sorts of stuff that it doesn't have any way to get rid of. And so because of that, then it has to deprioritize things like energy production, metabolic flexibility. So I just think that there is a much, much bigger conversation here than just this calories and carbohydrates when it comes to understanding blood sugar and insulin resistance. And until we come to the table and really start to think bigger and better, we're going to continue this statistic of 1 in 3 individuals having prediabetes, 80% of them not knowing it until they show up at their doctor. Oh my gosh, I randomly have diabetes. I'm like, guarantee that's been building for about 5 to 10 years. And you just haven't been, like I said, working with a practitioner who's helped you identify that, either through signs or symptoms or through more complex and proactive lab testing. So if you haven't been if you've been thinking like a healthy diet is either you've been in this calories camp or you've been in this carb demonization camp, we have to think bigger and better. We have to understand that metabolic flexibility is going to be the way of the future. Metabolic flexibility is your body's way of managing energy production. It is what it is, right? And when it comes down to it, we have to be thinking about preserving metabolic flexibility. We have to be preserving energy availability, micronutrient availability, and addressing any sort of liver congestion or detoxification issues. So that's where I want you guys to start to get the wheels turning a little bit, not to get too deep dive into any one of those categories on its own. But if you know that you either have a family history, you've been trending this direction towards some blood sugar imbalances, or it's been kind of top of mind, top of brain based off of how you feel on a regular basis, I would highly encourage you to start thinking bigger around just thinking that like, oh yeah, she said to balance my blood sugar, I must need to go keto. It's like, nope. Very, very rarely is that somebody's story. It's bigger than that, right? So we need to kind of get ourselves out of those concepts and get ourselves into thinking about your health as a hierarchy and as an entire metabolic picture. If you are curious about this for yourself, you want your own labs drawn, you want consultation with myself or myself and my partner, Dr. Lowski here at Renew Institute, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can apply to work with me in the link in my bio. You can also call our main Renew Institute office line and schedule yourself labs and an initial consultation. We do virtual and in-person appointments as well too. So hopefully this was helpful to kind of wet your whistle a little bit for some of my nerds out there that like to get into the metabolic health side of things, and we'll keep diving into your guys' questions and answers week over week. So enjoy the rest of your Monday, and we'll talk soon.